It doesn't have any airtime. It's rough. It's just forceless. Yes, there are a lot of reasons why people just don't like us. Some even hate the big one at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. But in my opinion, this ride, considering it's the tallest roller coaster in the UK especially, and it was the tallest roller coaster in the world when it opened, not forgetting the steepest as well, I can't help but think that it's a bit overhated these days. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not the best roller coaster in the UK, but it's still a good coaster. And yeah, I just think, you know, it just gets too much hate, especially when considering how big a deal it was when it opened. So in this review, I'm going to be explaining why I think the big one is overhated based on my thoughts on it, and why I think we should give it a bit more appreciation. This is a review in a series of reviews, so be sure to subscribe and click the bell to enable notifications so you don't miss any future reviews. But without further ado, let's get into the review and give this ride the love that it deserves. The Big One is an aerodynamic steel hyper roller coaster that opened in the UK in 1994. Upon opening, it was the tallest and the steepest roller coaster in the world. However, not the fastest, because Steel Phantom at Kennywood was the fastest in the world at the time, with the Big One being the second fastest. Quite impressive, 74 miles per hour. The ride itself is, however, still one of the longest roller coasters in the world, measuring 5,497 foot in length. Its total height is 213 foot, so it doesn't just scrape that 200 foot mark that's needed for a coaster to be classed as a hypercoaster. It's a bit taller than 200 foot. It does have a first drop of 205 foot, reaches speed of 74 miles per hour, as I said. It doesn't have any inversions, and that drop that I just mentioned has a vertical angle of 65 degrees, which is a pretty impressive angle for a ride when considering the restraints it has. Its duration is approximately around 3 minutes, and riders can experience up to 3.5 G at the bottom of the first drop and 0.5 negative G-force. The ride features 3 trains, each with 5 cars, with 3 rows of 2, so each train can sit 30 riders. The ride, however, usually operates on 2 trains. It rarely operates on 3 these days. It was actually called the Pepsi Max Big One between 1994 and 2011. However, in 2011 the Pepsi Max branding was removed, and it's known today simply as the Big One, or Big One even. Its capacity is 1,700 hours an hour when it's running on 3 trains, but as I mentioned back there, it usually just runs 2 trains or 1 train. It never runs 3 trains these days, and it actually featured in the 2016 movie A Monster Calls, which is an interesting one. I'll have to go and check that out because I've not actually seen that. I'll have to go and check out that segment of the movie, or just watch the movie in full, I guess. But yeah, those are your basic facts about the ride. It was actually beaten in terms of height by Fujian. I can't even pronounce the ride at Fuji Island in 1996. I mean, most of you are enthusiasts, so you probably know the ride I'm on about. Yeah, anyway, let's get into the ride experience itself. So the ride itself is located towards the south end of the park. It's in the area of the park known as South Park, which is basically the section of the park closest to the south of Blackpool. You've got rides such as Revolution and Steeplechase in that section of the park, and you can actually see it on your way into Blackpool, actually, with it being located on sort of the south side. If you're travelling into Blackpool, say you've just come off the M55 travelling north and you're travelling along up that promenade, you will see the Big One. And I mean, it's still the tallest roller coaster in the UK, as I mentioned, and it's fair to say that it's arguably the biggest icon of Blackpool. Sorry, icon. But yeah, and the other that you could argue obviously is Blackpool Tower. But I mean, when we all think of Blackpool, let's face it, we think of the big one, especially when we're enthusiasts. But yeah, the ride's located at the south end of the park, and you'll sort of enter under the lift hill. You've got a big sign saying Big One, but you'll enter under there into a cattle pen queue that's sort of under this canopy area that goes under the lift hill. Speedy Pass and E-Band users, you will enter the Big One on its exit ramp, and you'll take a right turn on that exit ramp, proceed up some stairs into the station. I believe though wheelchair users and anyone who can't use stairs for whatever reason can use the exit ramp and take the left in sort of the junction area and basically continue up the ramp into the station and still use that exit to get onto the ride. Just be careful though, because it is quite a narrow path, so you will have to move to the side when people are getting off the ride, so it can be a bit of a nightmare in that sense. But yeah, they actually changed it for the 2020 season in terms of using those stairs, which basically leads you up into the station. If you take the right at the junction on the Big One's exit ramp, you'll go up some stairs into the station, and you'll sort of enter a cattle pen area where you'll join up with the main queue, which is where the wristband scanner is located, and you can then choose your air gate, which you can't do and you couldn't do if you use the full exit ramp. There will be someone there and basically they'll assign you a seat, which is how it was until 2020. But when me, Josh, Danielle and Emily went in 2020, that's when we found out that they changed the E-Bands and Speedy Pass queue to that right junction on the Big One's exit ramp. But yeah, in terms of the main queue, you'll go around the cattle pen under that canopy, and I believe they're actually using some of Skyforce's cattle pen, the Gerslar flat ride next to it, as extended Big One queue to basically ensure that social distancing can take place, with obviously guests needing to be 2 meters apart. Any queue will stretch longer than it would normally for a given waiting time, so they are using Skyforce's cattle pen as part of the Big One queue. But in a normal non-COVID world, you'd basically walk under the Big One sign, enter that cattle pen, which isn't normally filled up, but it can be on busy days. You'll then proceed up a ramp that basically runs parallel to the Big One's lift hill, proceeding sort of towards the front end of the station where the train exits out and takes a 180-degree turn to the right. Pretty much goes under a tunnel which is still themed to Pepsi Max. That's a little bit of sort of a Pepsi Max sort of brand that still remains. There's not really any other branding for that elsewhere around the ride area and on the ride itself. But you'll proceed to the front of the station. When you reach the front of the station, the queue makes pretty much a 180-degree turn to the left into the station. You then got some switchback cattle pen sections, a few of those, and then you reach the air gates. You'll choose your row and get on the ride pretty much. There's a queue for the front row now, which is new for 2020. You can queue specifically for the front. That basically solves the problem of people fighting over the front row, pretty much, and that sort of disrupting basically the rest of like everyone else and operators and stuff, because you know there's often quite a few people want to do the front row. It's obviously a popular role on that ride, as we'll get into in a minute. Should also mention the fantastic soundtrack by The Notable Stranger that plays in the station and in the queue line, which was new for Roller Coaster Day 2019. So it's pretty much been there for a year. Well, it's been there exactly for a year as I'm recording this. 16th of August 2019 onwards is when you would have been able to hear that amazing soundtrack, which you can also hear in the background of this video. But anyway, you board your row, you pull down on your lap bar, which is, not gonna lie, doesn't secure you that much. And you've also got seat belts, which you can tighten as well, for basically additional safety. And then you hear that iconic klaxon noise. Yeah, that wasn't the actual noise, but I just thought I'd put one in there so you kind of know what I mean. When the train leaves the station, it takes a 180-degree turn to the right through the Pepsi Max Tunnel, which is one of 2 tunnels on the ride, and then you proceed up that 213-foot lift hill. There's markers every 50 foot, basically, so you can see as a guest how far up on the ride you are. And then obviously to the left of the ride you can see sort of the south of Blackpool. In front of you you can see the sea. Behind of you can see like Nickelodeon Land and sort of outside of the park. And then to the right of you, you can see the majority of the park, you know, all the
rides, the shows, the fun, the thrill, the joy, the spirit, the adrenaline.
Okay, that's enough of that. But yeah, you reach the top of the lift hill, which is not, I will mention now because I forgot to mention this before, it's not 235 foot tall Blackpool Pleasure Beach. That's how tall the ride is above sea level, not how tall the ride is from ground up, if you get what I mean. And it's 74 miles per hour, not 85 miles per hour. Stop trying to advertise the ride as being the fastest ride in the UK just because you hate stealth at Fort Park, okay? Yeah, anyway, so you reach the top of that 213-foot lift hill. You drop to the right down that 65-degree, 205-foot drop, reaching maximum speed of 74 miles per hour. And you can experience 3.5 G at the bottom of that drop. And I'm not gonna lie, it's the best first drop in my opinion on any roller coaster. Yeah, that I've ridden. It's just incredible. You know, and the views, they are the best views on any roller coaster as well. In fact, you can see the park, you can see the south of Blackpool. You know, you can see out to sea. The views on this ride are absolutely beautiful. And one reason why it needs to be appreciated. And that drop just doesn't get enough credit for what it is. It's an incredible drop. On the back row, you were absolutely flung out down that drop to the point where you get actually some decent airtime that no one ever gives any credit to. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, on the back row the drop can be a bit rough because of how snappy it is, and you can be shook about a bit as you're going down it. But it's nothing compared to Grand National or Big Dipper on a wheel seat, let me tell you that. But anyway, you hit the bottom of the drop, and yeah, it's just incredible. You then proceed into a very tall hill, one of 2 hills, the other being the lift hill, that Blackpool have had to put beacons on because Blackpool Airport's about a mile away, and they obviously need to warn low-flying aircraft. So we can sort of avoid that. So beacons are needed so that basically pilots can clearly see the top of the big one at those sort of altitudes. But yeah, you proceed over that hill. Unfortunately, because it's such a tall hill, you don't get that much airtime, and that's one of the reasons people hate this ride. However, on the back, I'm not gonna lie, you can get a tiny bit. It's very minimal though. You won't think it's minus 0.5 negative G, let me tell you that. But you proceed down another drop which isn't that steep. But don't get me wrong, you do keep your speed up quite well, and for that reason it is quite a fun ride. Following the coastline, turning to the right slightly into the ride's turnaround, which is quite steeply banked. This can be a little rough sometimes, but it's nothing unbearable. But you proceed around that, then down another drop, and you've still got these amazing views. And you know, this is the main thing with this ride. You know, it maintains its speed quite well, providing that the wind isn't too strong. If the wind is too strong in a westerly direction, the ride can't operate, basically because of the risk of it stalling. But on a good day, you'll be flying around the circuit on this ride, and it's just so fun. You know, with it having such, you know, it's a fast ride, it's quite fun, and you know, those views as well, you've got to appreciate it. And you know, it's just got an old classic feel to it, and that should be appreciated, especially with it being icon of Blackpool. But you then go into free Airtime Hills. Well, not really Airtime Hills, because again, unfortunately, these do not give much airtime because they are also quite high off the ground when you consider how fast the train is travelling. So although this ride does maintain its speed quite well at this point, unfortunately the ride isn't travelling fast enough over the crests of those hills to give you much airtime. But pretty much the ride follows the shoreline back towards the south of Blackpool, because obviously travelling towards the north of Blackpool once you've turned to the right on that first drop. So you're travelling back to south of Blackpool and you go over 3 Airtime Hills, each slightly banks to the left. You'll pass by the Boulevard and Big Blue hotels, and you'll get some nice sort of interactions with the rides. You know, there's some really good head choppers on this ride, with like a Big Dipper, I think there's a head chopper with that, and also Nickelodeon Streak. And I'm not gonna lie, it does get close to those rides, and there's some really good elements actually, although you're not getting that much airtime or that much force. But it's just a fun ride, as I said, travelling so fast, seeing all those views. It really is, it's so fun when it's running at its best. Some days it'll be smooth, some days it'll be a bit rough, and sometimes the roughness can ruin it a bit. But for me, really, I've only had one ride that it's really affected. I feel like because I'm quite a small person as well, those trains are quite compact. Because I'm quite small, I find them okay, but obviously I think for larger people, with those trains being so compact, if the ride's rough, it isn't that pleasant. It's been pleasant. But yeah, after those hills you hit the mid-course brake run, which unfortunately is quite high off the ground and does slow the train down quite a bit, so it's practically the end of the ride after that. Really, there's not too much after this, but there is a fun helix. You'll go around, you then go into another small hill, interacting with Nickelodeon Streak. You'll then drop down to the left under this tunnel, a second tunnel on the ride. You'll then proceed upwards and pretty much into the final brake run, and then you'll pretty much go on another 180-degree turn to the left, back into the station, and that's the ride experience. You can also hear that incredible Big One soundtrack on the brake run, which is a really good addition. I'm really happy that they've done that. I really like the soundtrack. You can hear it in the background now, and I'm not going to lie, it really enhances that build up to the ride when you're getting on it. It really is good when in terms of building up anticipation, as I'm sure you'll be able to understand listening to it now. You then get off the ride and you get your bags. There's some small racks by the ride where you put them on when you're on the ride, and then you proceed down that exit ramp, back out the canopy, and then that's the ride over. Nothing really special there, theming wise or anything. The ride's not really got any theming. Obviously it's got its soundtrack, but a ride this tall doesn't need theming. What this ride is great for, and I'll mention it again, it's the views. That first drop's very thrilling. The anticipation of climbing up such a large lift hill to the top. Any ride, in my opinion, this tall, it's impressive. Its height alone makes it impressive. It's great that we have this in the UK, because we don't have that many tall coasters. We've got Stealth at Thorpe Park, obviously. We've got the Odyssey at Fantasy Island, a couple of others. The Swarm at Thorpe Park's quite tall, Millennium at Fantasy Island, but we don't have a ton of tall coasters, which is why the Big One is so special, especially when it's still the tallest roller coaster in the UK, and it's the second fastest in the UK, only beaten by Stealth with its 80-mile-an-hour launch. It's impressive, as I've said. Even the views make it impressive, and it's just a fast, fun ride with some great views. Even though after the first drop, it's only mildly thrilling, really, because all the drops after that, really, although some of them are quite big, they aren't really that steep, and you don't get any airtime really, just some little bits if you're on the back row. But for me, the first drop is what really does it, because as I've said, it is incredible, especially on the back row. And then on the front, you get some incredible views, I should mention, of the beach from it. You're hung there for 5 seconds, and you just sat there basically oh, when are we gonna go? And then you're released, and you proceed down the drop. But for me, my favourite place to sit on the big one is definitely the back. For those little bits of airtime you do get, and obviously getting pulled over that first drop when you are literally whipped out your seats. And I'm not going to lie, you can get shook around a bit like you're in a cardboard box. If the train if it's running quite rough that day, but it's nothing unbearable. And for me, if anything, it really does add to the thrill of the ride. But without further ado, let me get into my ratings for this ride. In terms of the intensity of the ride, for me, it's going to get 4 out of 5 because of that first drop. You know, that is quite an intense part of the ride, obviously, but it is quite a low 4 because the rest of the ride isn't that forceful. So yeah, it's nothing really special about it in terms of intensity after the first drop. But I think that first drop alone, the thrill of going down such a large drop, you know, for me, puts it up to 4 out of 5 thrill points. In terms of the smoothness of this ride, as I mentioned briefly, it can be a bit rough some days. I should also mention that Blackpool Pleasure Beach have done some retracking of the ride. They did some retracking back in the early 2000s to late 2000s, and then obviously they retracked it again, that section just before the mid-course brake run at the bottom of one of the drops between 2019 and 2020 in the 2019 closed season. Don't get me wrong, that retracking from 2019, you can't compare the difference between the sort of mid to late 2000s retracking to how it was before, because obviously I only rode the ride first of all in 2018, which was the roughest ride I did have on it, to be fair, that very first ride. But yeah, that retracking between 2019 and 2020 definitely has made a difference to that section of the ride. It's a lot less jolty now. When I say the ride is rough, it really is mainly jolts. It's not like a continuous like rattle like on the wooden coasters that sort of horrible like it's not like that, but yeah, it can be jolty in places, and yeah, for that reason I'm going to give it a 3. In terms of the ride elements, as I said, apart from that first drop, it's not got a ton going for it. It is nice that it sort of stays up high above the park, because that does help sort of enhance the views and make it enjoyable in that sense. But as I said, it doesn't really have much air time or anything like that. So for me, it would be better, and probably the best roller coaster in the UK, to be honest, if it did feature some Airtime Hills that were a bit lower to the ground that gave some more airtime. And for that reason, I'm going to give it a 3 for ride elements. Now, in terms of presentation, this is the ride's strong point, because you get, as I said, some incredible views from this ride, some of the best views on any roller coaster. And in terms of off-ride as well, it looks really good from around the park, this ride, towering above you on all the other rides, because the tallest ride, apart from that, is Infusion, which is pretty much like half the height of it, so it is a big ride. Obviously on Icon as well, when you're going up, it goes over at sort of the exit out of Icon's top hat, so you get some really good like interactions there. Obviously lots of interactions around the ride as well, and it just looks brilliant from all angles. I can't fault the presentation, and in terms of sort of it's not got any theming as such apart from that soundtrack, but that soundtrack is brilliant. So it is a very, very good overall package, the big one, and for that reason I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 thrill points for presentation, which gives it a total score out of 15 out of 20, which is really, really good. You know, that's 75%, and that just shows that it is a good coaster. And in my opinion, it does get a bit too much hate. Don't get me wrong, there are people that appreciate it. You know, there are people who like, you know, it's really grown on them recently, the big one, who enjoy it a lot more than they used to. And there are people who do love this ride as well, but I do think that this is a ride overall that deserves a bit more appreciation. It doesn't give much airtime, which really a coaster of that size should. And for a coaster of that size, it's not anything amazing. It probably is one of the worst hypercoasters ever to be built, But for the UK, it is a brilliant ride. Like, you can't deny that. Like, it's an icon of Blackpool. Sorry, icon again. But yeah, it's just absolutely brilliant. Blackpool just wouldn't be Blackpool without this ride, and it deserves a lot of love. But that's all I have to say about the big one. And make sure you subscribe and click the bell so your notifications are enabled, so you don't miss any of my future videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.